Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Joining us now to help us get to the bottom of all things Pac-12 media rights, all things.
Yeah, after this show, we're going to have it's all going to be settled.
Controversial Pac-12 tweets and whatnot. Our friend Brett McMurphy, America's college football insider for the Action Network. Brett, how are you? Long time no talk.
Yeah, good to talk to you guys. It's been a while. Glad to catch up. A lot of uncertainty going on with college athletics. So in other words, it's just another Monday. But thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So look, I'll start at the very top. You tweeted out on Friday, and I quote, Apple still has not made a formal offer for the Pac-12's media rights, but Ion Television has emerged as a potential Pac-12 partner, sources told Action Network. Ion TV, owned by EW Scripps Company, 61 local TV stations nationwide, and launched Scripps Sports this year. For context, Ion is where you can find some reruns of a bunch of popular cop shows like Criminal Minds and Blue Bloods, and I think every version of NCIS, but also they are, I think, pretty out there with respect to they want to get into sports. It is owned by EW Scripps. Scripps Sports is a new venture. They've got some experience with live sports. So this, I think, took a lot of people by surprise. We made some of the jokes. Social media made a lot of jokes as well with respect to this. Our friend Stu Mandel from The Athletic came out and said that his sources were telling him otherwise, that maybe this wasn't the case. Then you retweeted, again, what your initial comment was on the 24th about Ion potentially being involved here. So where do things stand with that long-winded preamble? Where are we at today, this being Monday, February the 27th?
Yeah, well, who knows? By the time you guys post this, it may be outdated. But, I mean, we know this much for certain. Fox is not going to be part of the Pac-12 deal. Turner's not going to be part of the Pac-12 deal. CBS is not going to be part of the Pac-12 deal. I reported all of those. Pretty much everyone has figured out Fox is not going to have anything to do with the Pac-12. It's tied up with the Big Ten. It's got its new agreement with the Big 12. They simply don't need the inventory. So the question that myself and a lot of other people have reported or wondered is, where else is the Pac-12 going to go? And the thinking is ESPN will get part of it, a smaller package, and then the rest of it could be streaming. I think as the New York Post reported that Apple was a potential there. However, Apple has not made a formal offer. Does that mean they won't make one or they will make one? We don't know. But as of a couple of days ago, they have not. What I was told is that Ion TV had emerged as a possibility for the Pac-12. I didn't say it was a done deal. I didn't say they had a deal done. I simply said that was a possibility. And, you know, I'm just the straight man. I did see a lot of the comments. But, you know, look, I'm just providing information. I'm not, you know, I don't have a dog in the fight. It doesn't matter to me. There are certain reporters that have seemed to take these media right news or speculation very personal. And you can kind of, you know, debate that in another discussion. I'm just simply reporting what I'm being told. You know, I think my track record speaks for itself. I'm not going to comment on what other people are reporting. All I know is when I report something, I stand behind it. And I've said this, you know, if I've said it once, I've said it a billion times. I'd rather get beat on 100 stories than be wrong on one. And we'll have to see what happens. You know, the Pac-12 is in a very challenging time right now. And, you know, part of it is because the Big Ten, we don't know what's going to happen with the Big Ten. From the people I talk to, they tell me that expansion is not dead. Now, does that mean the Big Ten's going to add somebody next week or next month? No, but I think within the next 2 or 3 years or sooner that they will. And so the future of the Pac-12 is largely dependent on how aggressive the Big Ten gets. I think they're going to be very aggressive because I still think their plan never was just to add USC and UCLA and leave them on an island. They want to bring in more Pac-12 schools. Obviously, you got to have the money to make it right. I think at some point, some way, somehow that will happen. And then what happens with whatever's left over in the Pac-12? Do those guys jump to the Big 12, or do they stay put with, whatever the Pac-12 adds as far as Mountain West teams or teams from the American?
So let's stick with the Pac-12 first before moving to, obviously the reverberations of an aggressive Big Ten continuing to look westward. How empowered is the Pac-12 commissioner in this search for a new media rights deal? How much of it is being driven by Pac-12 presidents? How much is it being driven by anybody else in the room, people advising the conference, whether it's media people? Does there seem to be like an actual cohesive strategy? Because we're hearing, major players in sports, minor players, we're hearing streaming from Amazon to Apple. Like, is there a plan, or is this we have to find money and turn over every rock, whether it's because we want to leverage somebody's interest against somebody else or something else? What seems to be behind the scenes, any sort of makings of a plan?
We're now 3 for 3 for trucks driving by. So
Great.
I know.
Great.
I know you'll clean this up.
We got you. You're
we
good.
will.
Yeah. Define cohesiveness. No, I'm joking. Look, the George Kliavkoff's number one goal is to present to the presidents the best media right deal that he can. Now, obviously, he would love to have that on ESPN, Fox, CBS, NBC. He'd love to have it go prime time, big noon kickoff on Saturday, all those different things. If you can't get those things, then you're going to get the next best opportunity that you can. And it all breaks down to dollars and cents. Now, the challenge for the Pac-12 is so many of those media networks that would have been involved are basically don't need any more content. And so that's why I think the Pac-12 is looking at all possibilities, because they've got to get their money up to a substantial level, because if not, there's the real fear that some schools could go to other conferences if the money that they have to remain in the Pac-12 is not sufficient.
Are schools in wait and see? Oh, we got a truck.
Jesus. I need to put up a blockade. Literally, I was here for 15 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Are schools in the Pac-12, especially the schools that are perceived to be the bigger ones, Washington, Oregon, Stanford, Cal, how much do you get the sense that they are truly feeling unified with the rest of the schools, and how much do you get the sense that they are still putting out feelers elsewhere? Obviously, the Big Ten is the major horse here, but how much are those schools actively trying to send texts and voicemails and DMs saying we're around, we're listening? How much? Yeah. What is the cohesion among the unification of the conference?
Well, they don't have to send out the hey, we're interested text messages and emails, because everyone already knows that's involved.
Right.
That's not an issue. Now, look,
okay.
Everyone's going to say, hey, we're all on board, we're all unified, we're all going to stick together, until they're not. I mean, that's common sense. I understand that. People, again, you could take the Pac-12 out of this. It's for any conference. Every conference is going to say, we're together, until they're not. And nobody's publicly going to come out and say, oh, I hate being in conference X, I want to go to conference Y, until you're already in conference Y. So
right.
A lot of people like to play this up. This Pac-12 president said they're sticking together. This Pac-12 president said they're expecting a new deal. Well, what else are they going to say?
Yeah.
It's like if I ask you guys, hey, how's the solid verbal going? What are you going to say? Oh, this place sucks? No, you're going to say this is the greatest place ever. And it is, by the way.
Thank you.
But you know what I'm saying? You're not going to say I'm out of here until you're out of there. So that's what's going on with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 schools, I think, at the end of the day, if you don't even have to give them truth serum. I think they would honestly say, and I would believe this, they want to stick together. But they don't want to stick together if the amount of money that they're going to make in media rights is $5 million, $10 million less than whatever the Big 12 is making, whatever the ACC is making. I mean, the comment that George Kliavkoff said several weeks ago, months ago, or whatever, on the record, that basically and I'm paraphrasing, basically a matter of time that it would take, and the Pac-12 would catch up or would be in the same neighborhood media rights wise is the Big Ten and the SEC. That's asinine. I mean, for him to say that, if Brett Yormark said that for the Big 12, that is asinine. If Jim Phillips said that with the ACC, that is asinine. That I don't understand why you would say something like that. Although I did have sources tell me the Pac-12 is adding the Dallas Cowboys, Real Madrid, and the New York Yankees to get up to that number. But so part of it is you've got people saying things that I think they really believe. They really want to stick together. But again, use you guys as an example. You'd love to stick together. You'd love to stick together. But then if you have an opportunity to go somewhere and double your income and do everything else is basically the same, 9 out of 10 people are probably going to make the jump where you can make more money. And so that's what the position these schools are in. All the conferences, the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, they all know who has an interest in them. But they all know it comes down to money. And ultimately, everyone's waiting to see what money George Kliavkoff presents to the president. You asked who's making the decision, all that. Kliavkoff is out there beating the bushes. He's trying to come up with the best deal he can. And another challenge, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it before, is if you go streaming, you may be able to get more money through streaming, but then how does that hurt you with exposure?
Right.
Perfect example, NHL on ESPN. When ESPN didn't do the NHL, crickets, you never heard about it. Yeah. Now that the NHL's on ESPN, you've got highlights all the time. That's great. So you lose the constant drumbeat of the network. If you're on a streaming service, you get more money, you have less exposure. There's not a right or wrong answer here. It's just your preference. So basically, once George comes to the president and say, okay, this is the offer we have. Let's sign this deal. Are you guys on board? Then at that point, I think these Pac-12 schools can make a decision of, you know what, we need some more time. And then they're letting their people know at the Big 12, hey, let's do it. The Big 10 is separate from that. If the Big 10, when the Big 10 offers Oregon, Washington, and whoever else may join them, they're gone, whether they sign a new deal or not. They'll get out of it. They're gone. So that's another challenge for the Pac-12 is you're not going to lock these guys into any long-term deal, probably 4, maybe 5 years. Plus, how eager are you, if you're Oregon or Washington, knowing that you're going to potentially at some point get an invite from the Big Ten, how eager are you to sign a long-term deal to stay in the Pac-12 when you know an invite to the Big Ten literally could be weeks or months away? So all these things combined has made this a real challenging, endeavor for George Kliavkoff, and I feel bad for him. I mean, it's hard, and I want to make this clear. It sounds like I'm taking shots at him. I'm actually not.
No,
it doesn't matter who the commissioner of the Pac-12 is right now. Any commissioner, whether it's Greg Sankey or Kevin Warren or whoever you want to put in that spot, if they were dropped out of the sky to be the Pac-12 commissioner right now, they would have the same challenges. It's not like somebody else could have some magic bullet. Now, you could argue maybe the Pac-12 should have had a different strategy early on and maybe tried to get some Big 12 schools or maybe do their media rights deal early, but they felt like they would have more money later on. They took a gamble. We see how that paid off with the Big 12 getting their new deal and actually having more security in a weird way because nobody wants any more Big 12 schools. That's why they have security. The Pac-12 doesn't have any security because the Big 10 wants their schools.
So, Brett, if we could go back to the money conversation for a second. You brought up a great point. It was going to be my next question anyway. But money obviously is a much, much bigger deal now, just given the current climate, than, say, 10 years ago. But for a long time, with respect to the Pac-12, the conversation has been around exposure. It's been around how do we get this conference much more prominently featured as part of the national discussion. If you're the commissioner of the conference and you're trying to negotiate these rights, you almost have to prioritize one over the other, right? It is a money-driven sport now, love it or hate it. And so I guess my question is, if you're a school like Oregon, if you're a school like Washington that obviously aspires to be part of that national conversation, is there any amount of money that you can take to them? You already know it's not going to be as much as the Big Ten or as much as the SEC. Is there any number that you can go to them and say, this is the best we can do, where they're going to look at it and say, all right, we're comfortable with that. We're fine with that to sign on for a long-term agreement, knowing that maybe we'll have an easier ride to the playoff, but at the same time, we don't get as much exposure and the Big Ten could be around the corner. It sounds like the obvious answer is no, but it's a very, very interesting situation, and all the more a reason, I think, to feel bad for the commissioner of the conference, because he really is negotiating from a position of weakness.
For Oregon and Washington, I mean, you may give them a number that they would sign a 4 or 5 year deal with the Pac-12, but ultimately the Big Ten could come calling the day after they sign it, and they would pay the buyout and go to the Big Ten. I think what Kleofkoff is trying to do is get the number competitive enough that he can keep the four corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, from leaving and going to the Big 12. So I don't know what that magic number is. Like I said, the Big 12's around 32 million. The ACC's about that number, or maybe a little bit higher. So I think that's what Kleofkoff is targeting. I think what has hurt him is that he was out there, this was a long time ago, but still he was out there projecting that they could get up to maybe 40 million. There's no way they're getting 40 million unless they do a streaming exclusive deal with Amazon and Apple, and then they overpay. Then you can get 40. Because another thing, and you nailed it perfectly, he's kind of negotiating from a position of weakness, is if you're ESPN, if you're Apple, if you're Amazon, if you're whoever else is out there that possibly could be involved, who are you really negotiating against? You're not going to just say, oh, you know what, I feel bad, we need to give these guys an extra, 100 million. No, ESPN's going to pay them as the least amount of money as they can. Why should they pay them more? They're not competing against Fox. They're not competing against CBS, NBC. If you're Amazon or Apple, maybe it's a little bit different. Depends on how much you seek that inventory. And that also, is one reason that I think the Pac-12 has been pretty aggressive as far as targeting, San Diego State and SMU, because if they're going to go a streaming service, they need more inventory. But then, there was a report from New York Post or Sports Business Journal that Amazon was only looking for one game a week. Well, if you're looking for one game a week and you're Amazon, you're not looking for the fourth pick out of the Pac-12. You probably want the number one pick. You can get it, but then you're going to have to pay X amount. And then if you get the number one pick, what's ESPN's philosophy going to be with, wait, I thought we had the number one pick. Now we're down to 2 or 3. Well, then we're lessening our bid. So it's a very, I would call it a Rubik's Cube, except it's probably more complicated.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing about the New York Post report was not so much that Apple was potentially in the running to get the rights. It, I think, implied that there wasn't much of a bidding war, that some of the other networks, some of the other media entities, many of which you referenced, were lukewarm on the Pac-12 as a whole. So when I saw your tweet about Ion, my first thought was, is somebody trying to create a bidding war that may or may not exist? What is the deal here? But if you're Apple, it makes sense. You understand why they'd want it on the network. I guess in a perfect world, if you're the Pac-12 or a fan of a Pac-12 school, Apple would overpay to get you on your streaming platform. However, it doesn't seem like they're necessarily motivated to do that either, which definitely does not put the Pac-12 in a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say until we actually see what some of these numbers are. And, it's just weird. And it's similar. I know you guys, you're not old, but I know you guys remember when the Big East and ACC kind of went head to head. And it was, we had the automatic 6 qualifying conferences, and it's very similar to this. And I tell people, that I know at the various conferences when there were 6 AQ conferences, I'm like, don't worry about being the best. Just don't be the worst. Because that's all anyone on Twitter or social media wants to do is make fun of whoever the worst is. Well, they were the 2 worst of the 6. And back then, the Big East, actually, you can make an argument that they had a better football product than the ACC. So what happened? The ACC swooped in, got Pitt, Syracuse. Eventually, they got Louisville. And then there's no Big East football. May it rest in peace. So now what happens? We've got 5 Power 5 leagues. They told the Big East, you're no longer an automatic qualifying conference. Then they created the college football playoff with 5 Power 5 leagues. So now what happens? We're going from 4 to 12. So what do you think is going to happen? I'm guessing that at some point they're going to say, hey, you know what? There's only 4, autonomous conferences out there now because, if there's been movement within the Pac-12. And then ultimately, I think 5 or 10 years from now, when you guys are running the universe, there will be 2 conferences. There will be the Big Ten and the SEC, and they will have 24 or more members, and that will be your Division I football. Everyone else will be in some other version of it. And who is in the SEC and Big Ten at that point, I don't know. But it's funny, we have Power 5, and I'm saying Power 4. It's the Big 2 and everybody else at this point, and everybody's just kind of trying to, the Big 12 is not trying to be better than the SEC. The ACC is not trying to be better than the Big 10. Everybody just doesn't want to be that bottom conference. And right now, because of a number of factors, some self-inflicted, some just bad luck, the Pac-12, is in that position where their future membership could include, there's been reports out there besides San Diego State and SMU, considering Tulane and Rice and all these. Look, nothing against those schools, but, there obviously would be more separation if that occurred, and the Pac-12 lost, anywhere from 2 to 6 schools to other conferences.
So inside the industry, so the industry obviously is a vague term. So it's television industry, it's college athletic industry, it's TV network industry. Is there a consensus on where, besides the fact that there's going to be a Big 2, is there a consensus on where this Pac-12 thing will probably end up, where this Big 10 thing will probably end up? And if I'm hearing you correctly, does that make whoever's running things at Fox and whoever's running things at ESPN, be it, Eric Shanks and Jimmy Pitaro, are they running the sport? Are they the 2 co-commissioners of the sport? Is that fair to say?
Commissioners may be a little bit too strong, but certainly none of these moves are being made by Kevin Warren. Didn't add USC and UCLA because he wanted to have 2 California teams in. He made the moves because his media partners told him if he did so, your conference would be worth X times more money. So that's why they did that. So if you want to say they're the commissioners, I guess that's one way of putting it. To kind of be, to look at it another way, all of these conferences do this all the time. They'll go to their media partners and say, hey, if we had school XYZ, what would you be paying us per school? What would that look like? And the networks are honest. They say, okay, we would pay you more, we would pay you less. So based on that, that's what causes conference realignment. It's not simply these conferences saying, oh, you know what, we want to add Arizona State because that'd be a cool trip down to the desert. It's like, no, we can add more value to our conference and all that stuff. So that's how all that happens. People like to blame ESPN. You guys know I used to work there. I'm not going to sit here and rip them. ESPN is just telling their conferences or their schools, you're worth this much money. So now the SEC says, well, what if we add OU in Texas? Okay, well, now you're worth this much. And then the SEC goes, wow, we should probably add OU in Texas. So that's how it kind of works. Obviously, the conference has to want to add additional schools or grow to do that. But when they see the financial rewards, it's like a no-brainer. Who's not going to say, you know what? I don't want to add USC and UCLA. I'd rather make less money. Nobody's going to do that.
How much of it is long-term strategic thought, and who is the one strategizing? Obviously, there's some sort of calculation. Okay, if we add USC and UCLA, everybody's, it's a rising tide. Everybody's going to make more money. If we add Texas, Oklahoma, we're going to make more money for ABC, for the SEC, everybody's going to make more money. Is there a calculation in saying, okay, we're adding this, but in that time, we are also potentially turning off people, casual viewers who root for teams not in these conferences? Is there any sort of calculation like we could get blowback and people might not be super into the sport as much as they used to be, as, ratings for the playoff have declined, ratings for some of the bigger games have declined? Is there a specific like actuary essentially for these networks who's trying to weigh all of these things?
No, I don't. I mean, there may be. Yeah, I don't think anybody involved in this likes to see conferences dismantled and maybe conferences eliminated. Like the Big East football. The WAC.
Right.
May it rest in peace. I mean, there's a lot of them that have come and gone because of all the moves or the dominoes resulting moves from other conferences. But bottom line is, the networks are trying to get the most attractive products for put on to broadcast to make them more money. That way, the conferences can receive more money. It's become the NFL. I mean, it's kind of always been the NFL, but now it's kind of becoming the NFL. You've got one conference on ESPN, you've got one on Fox and CBS, and I think at some point, like I said, there'll be 24 teams or more. The two champs will play in whatever college football Super Bowl is called at that time. But I don't think anyone's sitting there going, you know what, we shouldn't take this school because this fan base won't like it or not. It's simply financially, does this make sense? And then they're going to make it work. And with USC and UCLA to the Pac-12, obviously geography was kind of the last, let's everyone kind of stay in their own kind of footprint or whatever. But then now with USC and UCLA, any thoughts that was, we were actually going to not go by those rules, but play by that thinking went by the wayside because, one AD told me, like, look, once you're on a plane, you're on a plane. It's not
Right.
the old days, the Southwest Conference where you drive to every game or anything like that. And that's why I've joked before, and I say this 1,000% as a compliment. The MAC is like a cockroach. When the world ends, the only thing that will remain will be cockroaches in the MAC conference because the MAC is so tightly together. And again, similar to the Big 12, nobody really wants the schools from the MAC. And again, I'm not being derogatory. That's just because of geography and other factors. And so they're secure where they're at and what they're doing. They're also not making as much money as the SEC or the Big 10. So there is a trade-off. But back to your original question, if they can add schools that bring value to their conference, they'll add any school they can. I'm just waiting for Beijing State and, China Tech to join one of these conferences when they bring in billions of eyeballs and more revenue.
Is there anything new at Notre Dame?
I think as long as they have access to the playoff, which a lot of people thought, they're not getting a first round bye, they're going to leave. I thought exactly the opposite. No, this is perfect for them. They don't have to play a 13th game. They have 12 games. If they finish in the top 12, they'll be in the playoff. They'll get probably 9 times out of 10. If they're in that situation, they'll be hosting a first round game. And so then if you win that game, then you're into the final 8. So your 13th game is not a conference championship. It's a playoff game that puts you in the quarterfinals. As long as they have the best of both worlds, which they do now with the ACC, with bowl tie-ins, homes for their non-football sports, I think they're fine. Obviously, a big thing that could happen, and I referenced Florida State earlier, is I think, again, this is not an if but a when. Whenever somebody in the ACC figures out a way to either climb over the wall or dig under that wall and get out of the grant of rights before the next 12 years get here, that's going to be the next biggest merry-go-round with conference expansion, because then you're going to see the SEC and the Big Ten go after the likes of Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Miami. You know who the suspects are there.
Right.
And then what happens, you asked me about, then what happens to Notre Dame? Does Notre Dame want to stay with an ACC that if, for instance, they lost anywhere from 4 to 6 teams, whatever the number is, maybe then at that point Notre Dame's like, you know what? I think we're better off joining a conference. And at that point I could see it. But Dan, until that happens, I don't think Notre Dame's going to do anything. They have no reason to. The money is not the same as the conferences, but it's very similar. but they get to call their own shots. They get to schedule their games however they want. They don't have to listen to anybody. And they do take a great deal of pride in being an independent. And people that have no affiliation to Notre Dame can't understand that and feel like, oh, they need to get in a conference. But if you know anything about Notre Dame, that's a big deal of pride for them. And so I think they'll hold on to that as long as financially it makes sense and as long as they have a path to the playoff. That's why you'll never see the SEC vote for only conference champions or only conference teams getting into the playoff, because that would force Notre Dame to a conference, in theory, to the Big Ten. And the last thing the SEC wants to do is help out the Big Ten in any way.
Right. And I bring up Notre Dame because I've half jokingly suggested that Oregon and Washington, and I don't know if it's only Oregon and Washington or other schools like Stanford and Cal or whoever, sort of zag as everybody's bundling to sort of unbundle and to pull a Notre Dame, to pull a BYU and have like a micro conference. And I don't know, what Oregon and Washington's rights are within their Pac-12 deal to go out and look for a deal themselves. But is there a universe in which Oregon and Washington could say, look, I know Fox or ESPN or Amazon or Apple, I know you guys are not interested in playing premium dollars because there's just not interest in this bundle of 10 schools in the way that there is for other conferences. But if you're interested, we will barnstorm. Oregon and Washington will barnstorm and play 3 or 4 Pac-12 teams, 3 or 4 ACC teams, 3 or 4 Big Ten teams, and fill out their schedule that way. Is there a world in which those schools either have or could explore that possibility?
I think they could. I think that would kind of be a last resort that you'd want to do that, because still, ultimately, even if you did that, whatever you would get, an offer to the Big Ten would be worth more. Now, if you're just doing that because you don't, if you just want to do that because you don't feel like the Pac-12 offer was what you expected, and basically they're saying, well, you sign the deal or you're out of the conference. Yeah, I could see that as a short-term solution. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to pair up with Notre Dame, because then Notre Dame's going to be taking less money, and they'll be like, why are we going to help you guys out? I think the biggest challenge for that would be if they do it with all of the power conferences going to 9 conference games. And believe me, the Pac-12 would have some kind of language that you cannot play any games against former Pac-12 members. That would be in the new grant of rights. They would struggle to find games, at least home games, because you're not going to find a lot of Power 5 schools that are going to play on the road. So if you do that, yeah, you can do that. But what's your fan base going to think if kind of the challenge that BYU had until going to the Big 12?
Right, exactly.
When four of 6 or 4 of 7 of your home games, or 5 of 7 of your home games, are against Group of 5 schools.
No.
Yep, makes sense.
Well, Brett, I was going to ask you if you would at all bet on more conference realignment, but I think I already know the answer to that. So why don't we close with this?
Minus 1,000.
Yeah. Minus 1,000. Yeah, yeah. Why don't we close out with this instead? What is the timing of the next shoe to drop here? Be it with the Pac-12, a school sniffing out another conference, media rights. Is it the next few weeks, the next few months? Where does the story go next?
Well, they're sniffing every day. Make no mistake. I think the next thing that kind of everybody in the industry, as you referenced earlier, is kind of waiting to see is what is the Pac-12 media rights deal going to look like. And a lot of the folks that cover the Pac-12 seem to think that we will get some kind of answer by either early or mid-March. So I would say at the latest by the 1st of April, something would have to happen. Not have to happen, but something along the lines with the Pac-12 would happen. And then from that point, depending on what those numbers are, if Kleopkov was able to cobble together a great deal for his schools, then I would expect them to sign it for a few years. And then just the next thing to be would be to see when the Big Ten ultimately goes after, or can get, again, not really go after, but get the finances required to add more Pac-12 schools would be the next domino. And then if that happened, then all hell breaks loose.
Wow. Well, look, it'll be an interesting next couple weeks. Maybe we'll dial you back up to get a further update as details become available. I know you're doing this interview from behind a garage, so we appreciate your willingness to hop on with us here and give us the lowdown on all things Pac-12.
Yeah, I got to stay undercover. I got to stay on the move. All these folks are out to get me, so I've got to stay in hiding. So thanks for not revealing the garage name.
No.
Next time I'll do it from a more secure location, and people can actually see my ugly face, so they can throw tomatoes at the screen or something. But we appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah,
I was hoping you were stalking somebody getting their car fixed, like the Washington State president is at the mechanics, and you're just like, oh, well, here I am. A couple questions.
The Washington State president is in Tampa. I can confirm that. He's trying to get USF. He's trying to get USF to join the Pac-12. You heard it here first.
Sure. He's bringing a basket full of Cuban sandwiches. That's how everybody sells things. Great.
Brett McMurphy, Action Network. Brett McMurphy, Action Network. Thank you so much for your time. Been a long time. We'll have to do this again soon.
I enjoyed it, guys. Anytime.